I never imagined my own mother would betray me like this. Growing up, I always thought Susan. My mother was a strong, independent woman who had everything under control. She raised my younger brother, Adam, and me after my dad passed away when I was 12. She worked tirelessly, often juggling 2 jobs, and never failed to remind us how much she sacrificed to keep a roof over our heads. I believed her. I believed every word. That's why, when my grandmother passed away and left me a substantial inheritance, it never crossed my mind that Susan would do anything other than what was best for me. I was wrong. My name is Rachel, and I'm 30 years old. I work as an administrative assistant at a small law firm in town. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me enough stability to live in a modest apartment downtown. I've always been careful with money, budgeting every penny, and thinking twice before making even the smallest splurge. That's why it hurt so much when I started hearing whispers that I had supposedly squandered my inheritance on luxury vacations and designer clothes. It started subtly at first, offhand remarks from family members at gatherings. My Aunt Linda, known for her not-so-subtle jabs, asked me at my cousin's wedding, "Rachel, I heard you took a fancy trip to Europe. Must be nice to have money to burn." I almost choked on my champagne. I had never been to Europe. Heck, I hadn't even taken a vacation in years. I laughed it off, insisting she must have been mistaken, but the look on her face said otherwise. Then came the judgmental looks from my coworkers, the concerned calls from my friends. My best friend Maya pulled me aside one evening after work. "Hey, Rach," she said, biting her lip. "Did you really spend all of your inheritance already? Because if you need help—" I cut her off right there, my chest tightening with embarrassment and anger. "Maya, I haven't touched that money, I swear. I don't know what everyone's talking about." She gave me a sympathetic look, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. I knew exactly where these rumors were coming from. My mother. Susan had always been controlling when it came to money, and despite me being an adult, she never hesitated to make suggestions about how I should live my life. When Grandma passed, Susan insisted that she help manage the inheritance, claiming it would be safer in her account since she had more experience with financial matters. She spun it so well, telling me it was temporary, just until I figured out what I wanted to do with it. I agreed, too exhausted from grieving to argue. Looking back, I should have known better. My mother had always favored Adam, treating him like he could do no wrong. He was the golden child, the one who got away with skipping chores, flunking classes, and still being celebrated at every turn. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the planner, the one who always followed the rules. But somehow, in Susan's eyes, I was still the foolish daughter who couldn't be trusted with her own money. The inheritance was supposed to be my fresh start. I had dreams of finally buying a small home, maybe even going back to school to get my business degree. But now, every time I tried to bring it up with Susan, she brushed me off with vague answers and empty reassurances. "Don't worry, sweetheart. It's all safe and sound. You're not ready for big decisions yet." I swallowed my frustration, trusting her because, after all, she was my mother. But the rumors wouldn't stop. They grew louder and more specific. Cousins mentioned hearing about expensive jewelry I supposedly bought. Neighbors whispered about a luxury car I was driving around. I didn't own any jewelry besides the watch I'd worn for years, and my car was a 10-year-old sedan that rattled every time I hit a pothole. I couldn't understand how people actually believed I'd wasted my grandmother's money when I was still struggling to pay my rent each month. One night, I sat in my tiny living room, staring at my bank app, scrolling through transactions that were nothing out of the ordinary. Rent, groceries, utilities, nothing extravagant, nothing even close to what people were saying about me. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. I realized that I had never actually seen any official statements from the inheritance account. Susan always reassured me it was there, but I had never checked it myself. And that realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The next morning, I decided enough was enough. I was done being the family scapegoat, the gullible daughter who let her mother run her life. I needed answers, and I needed them now. The breaking point came at my cousin's birthday party. It was one of those overly lavish family events Susan loved: big catering, expensive decorations, and enough food to feed an army. As I stood by the dessert table, picking at a slice of cake, I overheard my Aunt Linda talking to a group of relatives nearby. "It's such a shame about Rachel," Linda sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "All that money, gone just like that. I mean, Europe? Designer handbags? And now she's back to living paycheck to paycheck. Some people just don't know how to manage their blessings." I felt the blood drain from my face. My fingers gripped the edge of the table so tightly, I thought the glass platter might shatter. Before I could stop myself, I spun around and walked straight up to them. "I didn't go to Europe," I said through clenched teeth, my voice louder than I intended. The group turned to me, some looking startled, others smugly unsurprised. Aunt Linda crossed her arms, giving me that condescending look she'd perfected over the years. "Oh, honey," she cooed, "there's no need to be embarrassed. We all make mistakes." Embarrassed? I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. "What are you talking about? Who told you that I blew my inheritance?" Linda shrugged, smirking. "Your mother, of course. She said she tried to stop you, but you wouldn't listen. She was heartbroken, poor thing." I felt a cold, sinking sensation in my stomach. I barely registered my aunt's continued ramblings as I scanned the room, spotting Susan laughing with a group of cousins, completely oblivious to the fire she'd just lit in me. I didn't confront her there, not with so many eyes watching, but the second we were alone in her car on the way home, I didn't hold back. "You've been telling people I wasted my inheritance?" My voice was sharp, trembling with barely contained anger. Susan sighed, keeping her eyes on the road as if my accusation was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "Rachel, sweetie, you're overreacting. People talk. I simply told them you were figuring things out, and somehow things got twisted." "Twisted?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "Linda said you told everyone I went to Europe and spent it all on shopping." She pursed her lips, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. "Well, I might have said you were enjoying yourself. I didn't say anything specific." I stared at her, disbelief churning into fury. "Mom, where is my money?" Her grip on the wheel tightened. "It's safe, Rachel. In my account, where it's been since the beginning. I told you I'd keep an eye on it, and I have. Trust me, it's better this way." I nearly choked. "Better for who? You?" "Because I don't see a dime of it, and everyone thinks I'm some irresponsible fool." Susan's jaw clenched. "You wouldn't have known what to do with it, Rachel. And let's be honest, I've had to use a little here and there for important things. Your brother needed help with his car, the house repairs." I felt like the air had been punched out of me. "You used my money?" She waved a hand dismissively. "It's still there, most of it. Don't be so dramatic." My fingers curled into fists in my lap. "I want to see the bank statements." Susan shot me a sharp glance, her tone suddenly defensive. "Rachel, I've been handling money my whole life. You don't need to worry about the details." "No, I want proof." My voice was cold, final. The rest of the car ride was silent, tension thick in the air. I knew I had to act fast. That night, I dug through my files looking for any bank documents related to my inheritance, but I found nothing. Susan had kept everything under her control, keeping me blind and naive. The next morning, I called the bank pretending to be checking on my joint account with my mother. The words the banker said made my stomach drop. "Ma'am, there is no joint account under your name." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. Susan had taken everything, and she had done it in a way that left me completely powerless. For now, I sat on my couch staring blankly at the wall, my phone still clutched in my hand. "There is no joint account under your name." The words from the bank representative echoed in my head like a relentless drumbeat. My mother hadn't just borrowed a little here and there, she had taken it all, and she had done it without leaving a trace of my involvement. My heart pounded as a slow, burning rage spread through me. For years, I had trusted her, let her control things because I thought she knew best. I felt sick, I needed proof, real proof, something concrete that could expose what she had done. That night, I went through every drawer, every old email, every scrap of paperwork I had. Nothing. I cursed myself for being so trusting, for letting her convince me that I didn't need to see the statements. The next morning, I called Maya, my best friend, and the only person I knew who could think clearly when I couldn't. I knew something was off, Maya said the moment I told her everything. But Rach, if she moved the money to her own account, getting proof won't be easy. Banks won't just hand over details to you. I know, I sighed, pacing my living room. I need to figure out how she did it. There has to be something. Emails, letters, anything. Maya paused on the other end of the line. You need to confront her again. Push harder. The thought made my stomach twist. I wasn't sure I could handle another round of Susan's dismissive excuses, but Maya was right. I couldn't just sit here, helpless. That evening, I drove to my mother's house, rehearsing what I would say the entire way. I walked through the front door without knocking, my pulse racing. Susan was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove, as if everything was perfectly normal. Rachel, she said without turning around, you should call before you come over. I didn't respond. I dropped my purse onto the counter with a thud and crossed my arms. I went to the bank. Susan froze for a fraction of a second before continuing to stir. Oh? They said I don't have a joint account, I said, my voice shaking. So where is my money, Mom? She sighed dramatically, setting the spoon down and turning to face me. Rachel, I told you, it's being handled. I moved it to my personal account for safekeeping. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. No, Mom, that's not how this works. It was my money. You had no right. Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms. I had every right. Do you have any idea how reckless you can be? I was protecting you from yourself. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Protecting me? By lying to everyone? By telling them I spent it all on vacations and shopping sprees? Susan rolled her eyes. I had to say something, Rachel. You know how nosy people are. I didn't want them asking questions about your finances. I let out a bitter laugh. No, you didn't want them asking you questions. Because you took it, she bristled. I didn't take it. I used it where it was needed. Adam had car troubles, the house needed repairs, and I've been struggling, Rachel. You have no idea what it's like to carry this family on my back all these years. The room felt suffocating. I didn't ask you to do that, Mom. Grandma left that money to me for a reason. She wanted me to have a future, not to bail you out every time you overspent. Susan's face turned red with anger. How dare you talk to me like that, after everything I've done for you? I took a step back, my resolve hardening. I want to see the bank statements. Every single one, she scoffed. Absolutely not. You're being dramatic, Rachel. I stared at her, my pulse quickening. Then I'll go to Grandma's lawyer. I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about this. That got her attention. Her eyes widened slightly before she quickly masked it with another dismissive wave. Fine, she snapped. I'll get the papers, but don't come crying to me when you see how much responsibility I've taken on for you. I didn't believe for a second that she would willingly hand them over, and I was right. Days passed with excuse after excuse. Oh, I couldn't find them. They must be in storage. The bank's been slow. She was stalling. Maya and I started digging on our own. We called the lawyer handling my grandmother's estate, and while they couldn't reveal details without legal action, they did confirm something alarming. Susan had claimed sole management of the funds, presenting paperwork I never even signed. Forgery, Maya said grimly. She must have forged your signature, Rachel. We need to take this further. I felt rage bubbling inside me, but it was mixed with an unbearable sadness. My own mother had done this to me. I decided to play along, pretending to drop the issue for the time being while quietly gathering everything I could. I went through old emails, looked for signatures that didn't match mine, and even scrolled through old family photos to see if I could find anything useful. The cracks in Susan's lies were starting to show. Then came the final straw. One evening, Adam called me, asking if I could help him with rent. "Mom said you're still sitting on a pile of inheritance cash," he said casually. "Can you lend me a little?" I almost dropped the phone. "Adam, I don't have the money. Mom took it." He laughed. "Come on, Rachel. She told me you were hoarding it, being stingy. She even showed me some bank papers with your name on them." My heart stopped. "What papers?" "Dunno," he said. "Looked like statements from some investment account. She said you just let it sit there." I ended the call and drove straight to my mother's house, walking in without knocking. "Where are the bank statements?" I demanded. Susan didn't even flinch. "I told you, Rachel, I'm handling it." "No, you're handling yourself." I pulled out my phone, showing her a photo of the document Adam mentioned, one that he had carelessly snapped and sent me. It wasn't even my handwriting on the signature line. "This is forgery, Mom, and if you don't fix this, I'll take it to court." Her face turned pale, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "Watch me." For the first time, I saw something other than defiance in her eyes, fear. I had her cornered, and she knew it. I sat in my car outside my mother's house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I couldn't afford to let fear paralyze me now. I had everything I needed: the forged bank documents, the proof from Grandma's lawyer, and the text messages Adam had sent me without realizing their significance. Tonight, I was going to confront Susan, and this time, there would be no more lies, no more deflections. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door. I didn't bother knocking. I pushed the door open and found her sitting in the living room, flipping through one of her glossy magazines as if she didn't have a care in the world. When she saw me standing there, she sighed, setting down her drink. "Rachel, this is getting ridiculous," she said in that same dismissive tone she always used when she wanted me to feel small. "I already told you, I'm handling the money." I slammed the folder of evidence onto the coffee table, cutting her off. "No, Mom, you're stealing it." Her eyes flicked to the folder, her jaw tightening. "Rachel, lower your voice. You're being dramatic." I shook my head. "Stop it. Just stop. I called the bank, I called Grandma's lawyer, and I have proof." I flipped open the folder and pointed to the signature line on the bank withdrawal forms. "This isn't my signature, Mom. You forged it." She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the front window, as if she was considering an escape. "Rachel, honey, I didn't let her finish. I trusted you. I thought you were protecting me, but all this time, you were using my money for yourself and for Adam." I could hear the anger creeping into my voice, my hands shaking. "And then you told everyone that I blew it, that I'm irresponsible? How could you do that to me?" Susan stood up, smoothing down her blouse, attempting to regain control of the situation. "You have no idea how hard it's been for me," she said, her voice dripping with self-pity. "Do you think this house pays for itself? Do you think Adam would survive without my help? I had no choice." I let out a bitter laugh. "No choice? You chose to steal from me. You chose to lie to me and everyone else. Don't you dare act like the victim here." She pressed her lips together, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she masked it with indignation. "It's just money, Rachel, and it was family money anyway. You wouldn't have done anything useful with it." I felt a lump in my throat, but I pushed it down. "Grandma left that money to me because she believed in me, Mom, not you. And instead of honoring that, you took it because you thought you deserved it more." Susan's expression hardened. "What are you going to do, Rachel? Take me to court? Ruin your own mother? Think about how that will look to everyone." I stared at her, feeling an unfamiliar sense of power rising within me. "Actually, I don't care how it looks. I've already spoken to Maya, and I have options." I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed copy of an email from Grandma's lawyer. "If you don't transfer every last cent back into my account within 24 hours, I will press charges." Susan's face paled. "Rachel, you wouldn't—" "I will," I said firmly, meeting her gaze without flinching. I'm done being the daughter you walk all over. I'm done letting you manipulate me. She sank back into her chair, her hands trembling slightly as she stared at the documents. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She knew she was cornered, and there was no way out. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Fine, I'll fix it. I exhaled, my chest still tight, but I wasn't going to let my guard down just yet. I want confirmation by tomorrow morning, or I'll go through with legal action. She nodded, her face defeated, and I turned to leave, feeling lighter with every step I took toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I heard her voice behind me. Rachel, you've really changed. I paused for a moment, but I didn't turn around. Yeah, Mom, I have. By the time I got home, I felt like I had run a marathon. I sat on my bed, staring at my phone, waiting for some kind of confirmation. I half expected Susan to try something else, another scheme, another excuse. But the next morning, an email popped up in my inbox confirmation of the full transfer, every cent back where it belonged. And just like that, I had won. But the victory was bittersweet. The damage had been done. I had lost trust in my mother, and while I had my inheritance back, our relationship would never be the same. Part of me mourned that, but another part felt relieved. Finally, I was free. The call started that afternoon, my mother's voice trembling, pleading for me not to tell anyone. Then the guilt trips. You ruined my image, Rachel. Your Aunt Linda won't even speak to me. But for once, I didn't let her guilt consume me. I simply replied, You did that to yourself. And for the first time in my life, I truly meant it. The morning after Susan transferred the money back, I woke up feeling an odd mix of relief and sadness. I stared at the email confirmation on my phone, reading it over and over as if it might suddenly disappear. The balance was finally back in my name, safe and untouched. But instead of the triumph I expected, all I felt was exhaustion. Years of trust, of believing my mother always had my best interests at heart, had shattered overnight. The fallout came quickly. My phone buzzed relentlessly calls, texts, and voicemails from Susan. At first, she was apologetic, claiming she never meant to hurt me, that she had only been trying to protect me from myself. When I didn't respond, the messages turned bitter. She accused me of being selfish, of airing family matters in a way that made her look bad. The guilt trips were endless. You embarrassed me in front of everyone, Rachel. Do you know what Linda said? Do you know what people think of me now? I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked her number and sat down with a cup of coffee, staring out the window of my tiny apartment. For so long, I had been tethered to my mother's influence, her control, her manipulation. Now I was free, but freedom felt unsettling. For years, I let her narrative define me. The irresponsible daughter, the one who couldn't handle her own affairs, but not anymore. Later that day, Maya came over with a bottle of wine, a smug grin on her face. So, she said, plopping onto my couch, are we celebrating? I laughed, shaking my head. I don't even know what to feel right now. Happy, angry, exhausted? Maya poured us each a glass. I'd say a little bit of everything. But mostly, you should be proud of yourself. You finally stood up to her. I nodded, sipping my drink. Yeah, I did. And for the first time, it really sank in. Word spread fast among our family. Aunt Linda called a few days later, her voice unusually soft. Rachel, sweetheart, I didn't know. I should have asked you before assuming the worst. She sounded awkward, almost guilty. If you ever need anything. I accepted her apology with grace, but I knew better than to rely on anyone in the family again. They had been too quick to believe the worst about me when it suited them. Adam, on the other hand, was another story. He showed up at my doorstep unannounced, his usual cocky smirk replaced with something resembling guilt. Look, Rachel, I didn't know Mom took it all, he said, shifting from foot to foot. I just thought, she said you didn't need it. I crossed my arms, staring him down. And you believed her. just like everyone else. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, I did. I'm sorry, okay? I really am. I wanted to hold on to my anger, to shut the door in his face, but I couldn't. He was just another victim of Susan's manipulation, just like I had been for so long. It's done now, Adam, I said quietly. I just need space. He nodded, and for once, he didn't argue. Yeah, I get it. As I closed the door behind him, I realized something profound. Susan had always made me feel like I had no one, but I did. Maya, my friends, and now even Adam seemed to understand that things had gone too far. I wasn't alone, and I never really had been. In the following weeks, I took steps to regain control of my life. I met with a financial advisor to properly invest my inheritance, ensuring no one, not even my mother, could touch it again. I updated all my legal documents, and for the first time, I felt in control of my future. One day, while sorting through old papers, I found a letter from my grandmother hidden in a box Susan had packed away. It was dated a year before she passed, and in it she wrote, "Rachel, my darling girl, I know your mother loves you in her own way, but you must always remember your worth. You are capable, smart, and strong. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. This money is yours because I believe in you. Use it wisely, and don't let fear hold you back." Tears welled up in my eyes as I read it. Grandma had always seen me, even when I didn't see myself. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it away in my nightstand, a reminder of the strength I had finally found. A week later, Susan sent me one last email. "I hope you're happy now, Rachel. You've ruined our family. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message without replying. I didn't need her forgiveness. I had forgiven myself for trusting her too much, for doubting my own instincts, for letting her control me for so long. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. A year later, I stood outside my new home, a small but beautiful cottage with a garden Grandma would have loved. The sun filtered through the trees, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. My life had changed in ways I never imagined. I invested the inheritance wisely, started a small business consulting firm, and finally took that long-awaited trip to Europe, not to escape, but to celebrate. Susan still called occasionally, her messages a mix of guilt and manipulation, but I no longer felt the need to respond. Adam and I had started rebuilding our relationship, slowly but surely. He even stopped by last week, bringing coffee and awkward apologies. As I sipped my tea in the backyard, I pulled out Grandma's letter again, running my fingers over the words. I finally understood what she meant about knowing my worth, and now I was living it. I smiled to myself. I was free, and I was finally happy.